My mom's high, you need to commit her. My own daughter's words stabbed me like knives. In that moment, in front of doctors and nurses, I became a stranger to my own flesh and blood. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would. And if you, for a single second, feel like this sounds familiar, I just ask that you leave a like and subscribe. It will help me keep unburdening myself. My name is Laura Morgan. I'm 63 years old, and for the last 2 decades, I've been a ghost in my children's lives. Not by choice, not through abandonment, but because of something they never knew, and I could never tell them. The hallway of Mount Sinai Hospital in New York smelled of disinfectant and desperation. Fluorescent lights flickered above my head as I waited for news about my granddaughter Natalie, just 9 years old, lying in a coma after a car accident. Her small hands, still stained with paint from her art class, rested motionless on the crisp white hospital sheets. I was wearing my navy blue blouse, the only decent one I owned, its small wrinkles betraying the long hours I'd spent traveling from Chicago to the city. My shoes, comfortable but worn, had walked the endless corridors of this medical labyrinth for 3 straight days. In my purse, an old faux leather bag I'd bought at a Brooklyn flea market years ago, I kept the only photos I had of Natalie, stolen snapshots from family birthdays where I was barely tolerated, and uncomfortable presents who appeared once a year as a reminder of secrets they'd rather forget. My daughter Jessica, 35, stood by the ICU door with that rigid posture she'd perfected since she was a teenager. Arms crossed, jaw tight, a gaze that looked through you without seeing. She wore an elegant black dress, her makeup flawless despite the circumstances, her hair pulled back into a tight bun that didn't allow a single strand to escape. Everything about her screamed control, success, emotional distance. Beside her, Mark, her husband, obsessively checked his phone, as if work emails were more urgent than the life of his own daughter. He was wearing a dark gray suit that probably cost more than my rent for 3 months, Italian leather shoes that gleamed under the hospital lights, and a watch I'd seen mentioned in luxury magazines I could never afford. "Dr. Hansen," I called to the attending physician as she left Natalie's room. "How is my granddaughter? Is there any progress? Is there anything more we can do?" The doctor, a middle-aged woman with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of too many night shifts, looked at me with the professional patience of someone who had seen too many families fall apart in hospital hallways. "Ma'am, I understand your concern, but medical decisions must be made by the child's parents. You are welcome to be here for support, but—" "No!" Jessica stepped between us like a human wall, her heels clicking against the linoleum with the finality of someone used to having the last word. "She has no right to an opinion on anything concerning my daughter. Nothing." Her words fell on me like stones, each syllable calculated for maximum damage. "Jessica, please," I begged, feeling my voice crack despite my efforts to remain composed. "She's my granddaughter. I love her just as much as you do. I just want to help. I just want to be here for her." "Help?" She let out a bitter laugh that echoed down the hall, drawing curious glances from other families also waiting for news. "Like you helped us when I was 12 and you just disappeared? Like you helped when Dad died of a broken heart waiting for you? Like you helped when I had to start working at 15 to support my brother?" Each question was a slap in the face. Each memory, a fresh wound. My phone, an old burner I kept for reasons my children could never understand, vibrated deep inside my purse. The specific pattern, 3 short buzzes, 2 long, was one I hadn't heard in months. The highest level emergency code. My past was calling me back just when I needed to be present the most. "That damn phone again?" Jessica pointed at my bag with contempt. "Who's calling you? Your dealer? Your partner in crime?" I couldn't explain that this phone had saved lives, that it had been my only connection to reality during years of horror and loneliness, that the man calling me from The Hague knew secrets that could topple governments, but that I couldn't share even with my own children. "It's not what you think," I muttered, putting the phone away without answering. "It's never what you think." Dr. Miller, the head of neurosurgery, emerged from a conference room with a folder in his hands. His steps echoed with the authority of a man who had made life-or-death decisions for 30 years. "The Gutierrez family, We need to discuss treatment options for Natalie. There are experimental procedures that might help, but they require full family authorization. Whatever you say, doctor, Mark replied instantly, as if the speed of his response proved his paternal commitment. We'll do whatever it takes. Money is no object. I took a step closer. Doctor, could you explain exactly what kind of procedure you're considering? What are the risks? Are there less invasive alternatives? The questions flowed out of me with the precision of someone trained to interrogate, to find the truth behind carefully chosen words. 20 years undercover had taught me to distrust easy answers, to look for the cracks in explanations that were too convenient. Jessica glared at me. What do you know about medicine? What do you know about being a mother? You left when we needed you most. You have no right to question anything. I have a right because I'm her grandmother, I replied, feeling something harden in my chest. Because I love her. Because even if you don't believe it, I never stopped loving you. Love? Mark scoffed cruelly. You call disappearing for 18 years love? You call showing up when you can't do a thing for anyone love? Dr. Miller cleared his throat, uncomfortable. Ladies, sir, I understand this is a very difficult time for the family, but we need to focus on Natalie. Time is crucial. Jessica turned to him with the fake smile she had perfected in her job as a marketing executive. Doctor, my mother has psychiatric problems. Always has. She makes up stories, fantasizes about lives she never lived. She should not be part of any medical decisions. She's unstable. The word unstable hung in the air like a death sentence. In the eyes of the medical staff, I saw doubt replace professional respect. I saw how a daughter could destroy her mother's credibility with a single, well-placed accusation. Besides, Jessica continued, her voice gaining confidence as she watched me shrink. She's been taking medication we don't know the source of, probably street drugs. Her behavior has been erratic since she arrived. Lie after lie, building a wall between me and my granddaughter, between me and any chance of proving that, despite everything, I was still their mother. My phone buzzed again. This time, the absolute emergency pattern. 5 short buzzes, a pause, 5 more. It was only used when lives were in immediate danger. See? Jessica pointed to my bag as if it were criminal evidence. There go her mysterious contacts again. Doctor, please, don't let her near my daughter. We don't know what she's capable of. In that moment, as my own daughter destroyed me in front of strangers, turning 20 years of sacrifice into a caricature of madness and neglect, I understood something terrible and liberating all at once. I didn't have to justify myself anymore. I didn't have to keep being the mother begging for forgiveness for sins I hadn't committed. I didn't have to keep making myself small so others could feel big. I pulled out my phone, unlocked it, and for the first time in years, I answered an emergency call in front of my children. Agent Morgan speaking. And with those 3 words, everything changed. The silence that followed was deafening. Agent Morgan speaking had been like dropping a grenade in the middle of the waiting room. I saw nurses exchange confused glances, Dr. Miller frown as he tried to process what he'd just heard, and Jessica's mouth open and close, unable to form a single word. The voice on the other end of the line was deep, familiar, and charged with an urgency I recognized from countless covert operations. Laura, Judge Ramirez is waiting. Santoro's testimony is falling apart. Without your statement, the entire Veritas syndicate walks free. That's 20 years of work down the drain. 20 years of your life wasted. I looked at Natalie through the ICU glass. Her small face, so much like Jessica's at that age, lay still amidst a tangle of wires and monitors that beeped out her heartbeat. The soundtrack to my nightmare. Give me an hour, I whispered into the phone, aware that my daughter was hearing every word with a mixture of disbelief and rising fury. We don't have an hour, Laura. The flight to Amsterdam leaves in 3 hours. Your star witness is about to recant his statement if you don't show. And you know what that means. Of course I knew. It meant that Carlos Ramirez, the accountant who had laundered money for half the state government for the past decade, could walk back his confession. It meant the politicians who had sold children like cattle could walk free. It meant the 200 families who had lost their daughters to trafficking rings would never see justice. It meant that everything I had sacrificed my own children for would have been for nothing. I understand, I said, feeling something in my chest finally break. I'll be there. I hung up and turned to Jessica, who was watching me with an expression I hadn't seen since she was a teenager, a mix of fear, confusion, and the specific rage that comes from discovering that everything you believed about someone was a lie. Agent? The word left her lips as if it had a bitter taste. What the hell are you talking about? Mark had moved closer, putting his phone away for the first time since I'd arrived. His usually arrogant face now showed a genuine confusion that made him look much younger and more vulnerable. Look, I don't know what kind of stunt you're pulling, he said in the controlled voice he used for business meetings, but my daughter is in a coma, and we are not going to let your fantasies interfere with her treatment. Dr. Miller cleared his throat, obviously uncomfortable with the family tension that had turned his medical consult into a domestic drama. Mrs. Morgan, could you please clarify your situation? If there are legal or professional complications that might affect the minor's care? Before I could answer, Jessica exploded. There's nothing to clarify. My mother is a pathological liar. She always invented stories to justify abandoning us. A federal agent. She laughed, a hysterical sound that was barely contained. Next week she'll claim she's an astronaut or works for the CIA. Her words hit me with the force of a physical beating. Each accusation landed on the precise spots in my heart where I had stored guilt and pain for 2 decades. Because she was right about one thing. I had abandoned them. But she was right for all the wrong reasons. Jessica, I tried to step toward her, but she recoiled as if my touch were toxic. Don't touch me. Stay away from me. Her voice broke, revealing for the first time the wounded little girl she'd been hiding behind all that adult perfection. Do you know what it was like to grow up without a mother? Do you know what it was like to explain to my classmates why my mom never came to PTA meetings? Why she was never at the Mother's Day pageants? Each question was a precise stab. I remembered those Mother's Day pageants at her elementary school, where all the little girls performed dances and songs for the women cheering from the folding chairs. I remembered 8-year-old Jessica, searching the audience for me, her hopeful eyes dimming when she confirmed that, once again, I hadn't made it. But I couldn't explain that at that very moment, I was undercover in a brothel in Bangkok, documenting how American girls were being sold to European businessmen. I couldn't tell her that every pageant I missed was because I was saving other little girls just like her from fates worse than death. I've been working since I was 15, Jessica continued, her voice gaining strength as she listed every one of my maternal failures. Cleaning offices after school just to afford my school supplies, taking care of Rob when he had nightmares because Dad was working double shifts to cover the expenses you should have been covering. Rob, my younger son, now 30 and living in Denver. He'd stopped taking my calls 5 years ago. He'd gotten married without inviting me and had 2 children whose names I only knew from the pictures I found on Facebook when I could get internet access. And now you show up here? Jessica continued her systematic destruction, pretending to be the concerned grandmother, pretending you have any right to an opinion on my daughter's life when you were never present in mine. Mark nodded in approval, clearly pleased to see his wife putting me in my place. Jessica's right. We don't even know where you've been living all these years. We don't know what you do for a living, if you even work. You show up here in old clothes, with no money to help with the medical bills, pretending to be part of a family you abandoned. His words hit where it hurt most, the truth wrapped in a lie. Because yes, I wore old clothes. The clothes I could afford on the substitute teacher's salary I used as my cover identity. Yes, I arrived with no money, because everything I earned on missions went into a federal fund I couldn't touch for personal expenses. Yes, I had abandoned my family, but only to protect them from threats they could never comprehend. My phone buzzed again, this time code red. An emergency that could not be delayed. I have to take this, I said, feeling the authority I had developed over years of covert ops seep into my voice, despite my efforts to remain small and unassuming. Of course you have to take it, Jessica screamed, completely losing her composure. You always have to take it. There's always something more important than us. There's always an excuse not to be here. But this time, I didn't hide. I answered the phone right there, in the middle of the hallway, in front of the doctors, the patients, and my shattered family. Morgan, Laura, Carlos Ramirez is dead. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Carlos was my key witness. The man who had decided to confess everything after his own daughter was kidnapped by the same syndicate he had been financing. His testimony was the centerpiece of the case that had consumed the last 5 years of my life. How? I asked, aware that my voice had changed completely, becoming cold and professional in a way my daughter had never heard. Apparent suicide in his protective custody cell, but we both know it wasn't suicide. They found him hanged with his bedsheets, but the ligature marks on his neck don't match. Someone got to him. Jessica was staring at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. For the first time since my arrival, she seemed to be truly listening, processing the tone and content of my conversation with an attention she hadn't shown to anything else I'd said. Without Carlos, you're all we have left. The voice on the phone continued. Only your testimony can keep those bastards in prison. And if they walk, you know they'll come for you, and for anyone you care about. The implied threat hung in the air like toxic smoke. After 20 years, after losing everything I cared about to protect them, the danger had found its way to my family anyway. I looked at Natalie through the glass, her small body connected to the machines keeping her alive, and I understood with terrifying clarity that everything I had fought for, everything I had sacrificed, all the pain I had caused and absorbed, came down to this moment. My granddaughter in a coma, my daughter who hated me, my key witness dead, and me, trapped between a past I couldn't explain and a future that threatened to destroy the only people I still cared about. I'll be in The Hague in 6 hours, I said into the phone, feeling each word push me further from any possibility of reconciliation with my children. Laura, there's something else. Go on. The judge has ordered protection for your family. If you agree to testify, we can guarantee their safety. But if you don't, I didn't need him to finish the sentence. I knew the rules of the game well enough to understand that silence also had its price. I hung up the phone and turned to Jessica, who was now watching me with a completely different expression. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked dangerously like fear. Who are you, really? She asked in a small voice, like the 8-year-old girl who used to wait up for me when I came home late from work. Before everything got complicated, before life forced us to become strangers. I looked one last time toward the ICU where my granddaughter was fighting for her life, where every medical decision would be made without me, where my voice would carry no weight. I'm your mother, I said simply, and I'm going to protect you, even if you won't let me love you. I turned and walked toward the hospital exit, my steps echoing in the hallway with a determination I hadn't felt in years. For the first time in 2 decades, I wasn't running from my past. I was running toward it to save the only future that mattered. The taxi to JFK Airport smelled of cheap air freshener and stale cigarettes. The driver, a middle-aged man with a graying mustache, kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror with poorly disguised curiosity. He was probably wondering what a woman my age was doing traveling alone to Europe with a bag I'd packed in 10 minutes and eyes swollen from crying. Going on vacation, ma'am? He asked with the feigned interest of someone needing to fill the silence. No, I replied, without elaborating. How could I explain that I was on my way to testify against the most powerful transnational criminal network while my granddaughter fought for her life in a hospital I might never be able to return to? My phone vibrated with a text message. It was Jessica. I don't understand anything. Why did you leave like that? Natalie woke up for 5 minutes. She asked for you. She said your name, not mine, yours. That message broke my soul in ways that 20 years of psychological torture never had. Natalie had woken up. My little warrior had opened her eyes, and in the midst of her pain and confusion, she had thought of me, of the grandmother she saw once a year, who sent gifts by mail that her parents probably threw out before she ever saw them. How was it possible that a 9-year-old girl remembered me with more fondness than my own daughter? The Delta flight to Amsterdam climbed over New York City as the sun set behind the skyline that had framed my youth and my early years as a mother, before everything fell apart. The city lights spread to the horizon like a map of lives I would never know, of families eating dinner together, of children doing homework while their mothers helped them with math. I had flown this route dozens of times over the past 20 years, always with false identities, always with passports bearing names that weren't mine. Anna Smith, history professor, Carol Vance, independent researcher, Mary Ruiz, freelance journalist. All the versions of myself I had created to exist in a world where Laura Morgan had to disappear to protect the people she loved most. But this time, I was flying under my own name, with my own passport, carrying in my hand luggage the documents that would prove who I had really been during all these years of self-imposed exile. The flight attendant, a young woman with a professional smile, offered me coffee and peanuts as she checked my boarding pass. "First time in Amsterdam, ma'am?" she asked with the automatic courtesy of international flight crews. "No," I murmured, remembering the dozens of times I had walked the streets of The Hague, undercover in organizations moving dirty money from the U.S. to Swiss bank accounts. I know the city well. What I didn't say was that I knew it from angles no tourist would ever see. I knew the basements where they forged documents, the apartments where they laundered money, the restaurants where American politicians met with European businessmen to negotiate the price of the corruption that had infected both sides of the Atlantic. I knew The Hague as a battlefield where I had fought a silent war for years, losing pieces of my soul with every operation while my children grew up believing their mother had simply decided to vanish from their lives. The flight was 11 hours. 11 hours to remember everything I had lost and everything I had gained. I remembered the day Director Reynolds showed up at my brownstone in Park Slope, 21 years ago. Jessica was 14, and Rob was barely 11. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was making lasagna for dinner while helping Rob with his math homework at the kitchen table. "Mrs. Morgan," the director had said, his deep voice carrying a gravity that instantly turned the domestic scene into something threatening. "We need to talk to you. About your husband. About what he knew before he died." Edward had died 6 months earlier in what the papers reported as a car accident on the highway up to the Catskills. He had left early that morning for a work meeting he'd never mentioned, kissing my forehead while I pretended to be asleep because we'd argued about money the night before, as we always did when our public school teacher salaries didn't stretch far enough. "Your husband was an accountant for the Veritas Syndicate," the director had explained, while my children watched TV in the living room, oblivious that their world was about to collapse. "He handled the books for their money laundering operations. And before he died, he gave us documents that could destroy the organization." I remembered the casserole dish slipping from my hands, shattering on the tile floor with a crash that made Rob run into the kitchen, asking what happened. "Nothing, sweetheart," I had lied, beginning a chain of lies that would stretch for the next 2 decades. "I just dropped a dish. Go finish your homework." The director had gone on to explain that Edward had been secretly documenting his employer's criminal activities, likely preparing to turn them in when they had him killed to silence him. His documents included names, dates, bank accounts, and routes for trafficking drugs and kidnapped girls. "The Veritas Syndicate knows he had this information," the director told me, his eyes having seen too much human evil to hold any illusions about people. "They're going to come for you, for your children. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but they will come." "What do you want from me?" I had asked, already knowing the answer would change my life forever. "We want you to disappear, to abandon your children, convincingly, to become someone else and help us infiltrate the organization from the inside. It's the only way to protect your family and get justice for your husband's murder." I remembered looking into the living room, where my children were laughing at cartoons, completely unaware that their mother was about to become a ghost to keep them alive. "For how long?" I had asked. "We don't know. Years, maybe decades, until we can completely dismantle the network. And my children? They will believe you abandoned them. They will hate you. They will grow up feeling rejected and betrayed, but they will be alive." It was the easiest and the hardest decision of my life. Easy, because there was no real alternative. Hard, because I knew I would be killing the mother I had been to become the shadow I needed to be. That night, I had staged a terrible fight with my children. I screamed that I was tired of being a mother, that I wanted my own life, that they had stolen my youth and were now stealing my freedom. Every word was like swallowing broken glass, but it was necessary to sell the story that I was leaving of my own free will. Rob had cried. Jessica had screamed that she hated me. And I had packed my lies and left, leaving behind everything I loved to become someone who could infiltrate the world that had killed their father. The plane began its descent over The Hague as the first light of dawn painted the sky pink and gold. From the window, I could see the city spreading out, a metropolis where I had lived a dozen different lives under identities that changed with the needs of each operation. But this time, I was returning as Laura Morgan, as myself, and for the first time in 20 years I was afraid, not of the testimony I was about to give, not of the criminals who likely already knew I was on my way, not of the death threats that had been my constant companion for 2 decades. I was afraid that after so long pretending to be other people, I wouldn't remember how to be the mother my children had lost. I was afraid that Laura Morgan had truly died that night 20 years ago, and that all that was left was a collection of false identities, desperately trying to remember what it felt like to love without conditions. The International Criminal Court building stood before me like a fortress of gray stone that had seen governments, revolutions, and secrets that could bring down entire nations. It was 7 a.m. when I arrived, after a flight where I hadn't managed to close my eyes for a single minute. My suitcase, an old Samsonite that had been my companion on dozens of missions, contained only the essentials: documents, photographs, and recordings that chronicled 20 years of systematized horror. At the courthouse entrance, Prosecutor Gabriel Stone was waiting for me, his expression a mix of relief and concern. He was a man in his 50s, with perfectly coiffed gray hair and a navy suit that had seen better days, but retained the dignity of a man who had dedicated his career to pursuing inconvenient truths. "Laura," he greeted me with the familiarity of someone who had shared secrets no normal friendship could bear. "Thank you for coming. I know what this means to you." "My granddaughter is in a coma," I said, cutting straight to the point. I had no energy for pleasantries when every minute away from the hospital felt like another betrayal. "My children hate me more than I thought possible, and my key witness is dead. So tell me exactly why you need me here." Gabriel led me through marble corridors where our footsteps echoed like the ghosts of all the injustices these walls had witnessed over the centuries. Tall windows filtered the Madrid morning light, creating long shadows that reminded me of the dungeons where I'd been interrogated during some of my most dangerous operations. "Judge Vandermeer wants to hear your side before passing sentence," Gabriel explained as we climbed a marble staircase worn down by millions of steps. "Without Carlos, you're the only one who can connect the bank transfers to the kidnappings. The only one who was in the room when they planned it all." "And if I testify?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "What guarantee do I have that my family will be safe? Full federal protection, new identities if necessary, relocation wherever you choose." Gabriel stopped in front of a dark wooden door marked with a golden number, Courtroom 7. "But if you don't testify, Laura, these men walk free in 72 hours, and you know better than anyone what they do to those who betray them." Of course, I knew. I had seen the bodies. I had documented the torture. I had lived for years knowing that a single mistake, one wrong word, could mean my children turning up dismembered in the New Jersey Pine Barrens as a message to others. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined. 3 judges sat behind a carved wooden bench, their black robes giving them an almost ecclesiastical solemnity. In the defendant's box sat 6 men in expensive suits, their expressions ranging from boredom to arrogance. I recognized them all from photos I had secretly taken over the years. Alejandro Santoro, a former Florida senator; Michael Torres, a hotel magnate; Francis Reed, a federal judge who had sold verdicts like merchandise; their lawyers, a phalanx of attorneys who probably billed more per hour than I had earned in entire years of undercover work, reviewed documents with the calm of men who knew money could buy almost anything, including convenient versions of the truth. "The prosecution calls Agent Laura Morgan of the FBI's Transnational Organized Crime Task Force to the stand," announced the court clerk, his voice reverberating in the tense silence. I rose, feeling the weight of every eye in the room on me. The defendants watched me with calculated hatred, their lawyers with professional curiosity, the judges with skeptical expectation. In the gallery, reporters scribbled in their notebooks, likely speculating about who this 63-year-old woman was who had appeared to destroy empires built on the suffering of innocent girls. I walked to the stand with steps that had learned to be silent over years of infiltration, but now resounded with an authority I hadn't publicly exercised in decades. My hand trembled slightly as I swore to tell the truth on the Bible, not from nerves, but because I knew every word I spoke would push me further from my family. "Mrs. Morgan," Gabriel began, setting the formal tone, "could you please identify yourself for the court and explain your relationship to the defendants?" "My name is Laura Esperanza Morgan," I said, and it was strange to hear my full name after so many years of using fragmented identities. "I am a special agent with the FBI's Transnational Organized Crime Task Force. For the past 20 years, I have been undercover, infiltrating the money laundering and human trafficking operations run by the organization known as the Veritas Syndicate." A murmur went through the room. In the defendant's box, Santoro watched me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The same smirk I had seen 1,000 times when he thought I was just Carol Vance, the naive journalist writing flattering pieces about his real estate projects. "During my infiltration," I continued, my voice growing stronger as I reclaimed an authority I had kept hidden for too long, "I documented transfers worth $800 million from American accounts to banks in Spain and Switzerland. I witnessed meetings where the kidnapping and sale of minors were planned. I obtained recordings where the defendants discuss eliminating witnesses and buying judicial sentences." Santoro's lawyer, a bald man with gold-rimmed glasses that glinted like coins, stood up with the arrogance of someone who had won more cases than he deserved. "Objection, Your Honor. This woman has no verifiable credentials. She has appeared out of nowhere claiming to be a federal agent, but we have no proof of her real identity or the veracity of her supposed infiltrations." Gabriel smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had been expecting that exact objection. "Your Honor, the prosecution presents documentary evidence." He pulled a thick binder from his briefcase. It contained every report I had ever written, every photo I had taken risking my life, every recording obtained with microphones hidden in cheap-looking bracelets, documents signed by 3 consecutive directors of the task force, photographs of Agent Morgan in undercover operations in Bangkok, Bogota, Medellin, and Madrid, audio recordings where her voice is identified by forensic analysis, and sworn affidavits from colleagues confirming her identity and her work for the past 2 decades. The presiding judge, a man in his 70s with a face hardened by decades of listening to every possible variation of human evil, reviewed the documents meticulously. "The documentation appears to be in order," he declared after several long minutes. "The court accepts the witness's identification. You may proceed with your statement." I looked directly at Santoro as I began to speak. For 5 years, he had believed I was just another corrupt journalist, willing to write favorable articles for a modest bribe. He had invited me to dinners at exclusive Manhattan restaurants, bragged about his political connections, and proudly detailed how he had turned the Port of Miami into the main entry point for drugs and kidnapped girls destined for the European market. "The defendant, Alejandro Santoro, personally explained to me," I began, watching his smile slowly fade, "during a dinner at Per Se on March 15, 2019, how he established transport routes for abducted minors using his authority as a senator to falsify identification documents." "That's a lie!" Santoro shouted, finally losing the composure he had maintained for months. "This woman is making it all up. I've never seen her before in my life." Gabriel hit play on an audio device. My own voice, secretly recorded during that 4-hour dinner, filled the courtroom. "Carol, do you know how much a 12-year-old girl is worth on the European market?" Santoro's voice sounded relaxed, casual, as if he were discussing livestock prices. "Depends on the nationality, of course. The American ones are cheaper than the Eastern Europeans, but more expensive than the Central Americans." And then my voice, feigning journalistic interest. "And how exactly does the transportation process work?" The silence in the room was absolute. Even the reporters had stopped writing. The recording continued for another 10 minutes, each second documenting with surgical precision how the market for human beings was organized from the highest levels of government. When it ended, the judge looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen directed at me in years. Genuine respect. "Mrs. Morgan, Are you prepared to continue your testimony? I nodded, feeling for the first time in decades that my voice could be used for something other than lying and hiding the truth. Yes, Your Honor. I am. My testimony lasted for 6 hours. 6 hours of describing in detail every crime I had witnessed, every child I had seen sold like merchandise, every politician who had signed false documents in exchange for briefcases full of blood money. My voice remained steady as I narrated horrors that would have broken younger people, but my hands shook every time I thought of Natalie, hooked up to machines 5,000 miles away. When I finished, the silence in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The defendants no longer looked at me with arrogance. Their faces had turned into masks of genuine terror. Their lawyers exchanged desperate whispers, searching for any legal loophole that could save their clients from the sentences that now seemed inevitable. Judge Vandermeer took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly, a gesture he had repeated 1,000 times over decades of hearing testimony that revealed the worst of human nature. Mrs. Morgan, he said finally, are you aware that your testimony has documented the most extensive corruption network this court has prosecuted in its 50-year history? Yes, Your Honor. And do you understand that by revealing your true identity and your undercover work, you are putting your personal safety and that of your family at risk? I understand. But my granddaughter is in the hospital, and I cannot protect her if these men walk free to continue their operations. Gabriel approached the bench with a tablet in his hands. Your Honor, the prosecution presents additional evidence that corroborates Agent Morgan's testimony. The large screen lit up with photographs I had taken myself over years of infiltration, grainy images captured with hidden cameras in brooches and bracelets, documenting secret meetings in luxury hotels in Miami, The Hague, and Cancun, where the fates of thousands of innocent victims were decided. There was Santoro accepting a briefcase of cash at the Mandarin Oriental, Torres signing forged documents in a Marbella office while counting bills, Reed authorizing fraudulent releases from his chambers at the Court of Appeals, while a terrified minor waited in a cell. Each photograph was a death sentence for their careers, their fortunes, their freedom. This documentation, Gabriel continued, has led to the identification and liberation of 300 trafficking victims over the last 5 years. Girls who are alive today because Agent Morgan risked her life to obtain this information. Torres's lawyer, an obese man in a pinstripe suit who was sweating profusely despite the air conditioning, rose in poorly disguised desperation. Your Honor, this is entrapment. This woman is a spy. Her methods are illegal. This evidence was obtained through deceit. The judge looked at him with the disdain he reserved for particularly stupid arguments. Counselor, police infiltration is permitted and authorized under both international and U.S. law when investigating crimes of this magnitude. Your client signed those documents of his own free will. No one forced him to confess his crimes to a hidden camera. As the defense lawyers crumbled one by one, my phone vibrated with a message that changed everything. It was Jessica. Mom, I need to talk to you. Some men came to the hospital asking for you. They weren't cops. Natalie is scared. I don't know what to do. My blood ran cold. The Veritas Syndicate had found my family. After 20 years of keeping my identity secret, after sacrificing everything to protect my children, the organization had finally connected the dots between Laura Morgan, the absent mother, and Carol Vance, the journalist who had documented their crimes. I showed the message to Gabriel, who paled as he read it. Shit, he muttered, momentarily forgetting courtroom protocol. How did they find them so fast? They have insiders everywhere, I whispered, remembering the survival lessons from my initial training. Hospitals, courthouses, airports. They probably knew I flew to The Hague before the plane even took off. The judge, who had overheard our whispered exchange, banged his gavel. Mrs. Morgan, do you require a recess? Is there a situation that needs immediate attention? I looked at the defendants, who were watching the scene with renewed hope. If I interrupted the proceedings now, if I ran back to New York to protect my family, these men would walk free, and their first act of revenge would be to find Jessica, Rob, and Natalie, and do to them what they had done to the families of other witnesses who had dared to defy them. But if I continued with my testimony, if I stayed in The Hague to do my duty, My family would be defenseless against hitmen who had no qualms about hurting children to send a message. Your Honor, I said, feeling something fundamental realign within me. I request immediate police protection for my family in New York City. My daughter and granddaughter are being threatened by associates of the defendants. Gabriel nodded and spoke into his handheld radio. Central Command, this is Prosecutor Stone, requesting immediate protection for witness's family at Mount Sinai Hospital, NYC. Direct threat from the Veritas Syndicate. Highest priority. The response was immediate. Units en route. ETA 5 minutes. I breathed for the first time in hours. Can you continue your testimony, Mrs. Morgan? The judge asked. Yes, Your Honor, but first, I need to make something clear for the record. I turned to the reporters, to the cameras broadcasting the trial live, to the world that was about to hear the full truth about who I had really been for the last 2 decades. My name is Laura Morgan. I am the mother of Jessica and Rob Morgan. I am the grandmother of Natalie Gutierrez. And for 20 years I have pretended not to love them to keep them alive. My voice broke slightly on those last words, but I pushed on. I let them believe I abandoned them because it was the only way to protect them from the organization that murdered their father. I let them hate me because their hatred was preferable to their death. In the dock, Santoro had completely lost his composure. "Shut up, you bitch," he screamed, lunging to his feet so violently that security guards immediately moved in. "Everything you have is stained with our blood. Your kids are going to pay for every one of us you put away." His open threat echoed through the courtroom, recorded by every camera and microphone. He had made his final mistake, publicly threatening the family of a protected witness during a live broadcast trial. The judge slammed his gavel. "Order! The defendant will be removed from the court immediately." As the guards dragged a screaming Santoro out, his shouts faded down the marble halls. "This isn't over! We know where they live! We know where your grandkids go to school!" Gabriel looked at me gravely. "Laura, this changes everything. The direct threat in court gives us authority for permanent protection, but it also means you can't go back to the States until the entire network is dismantled." I understood the implications immediately. I could save hundreds of girls by keeping these men in prison, but the cost would be not being able to hold my granddaughter when she woke from her coma, not being there for her recovery, not being able to explain to my children that everything they believed about me was a lie wrapped in truth. But for the first time in 20 years, the choice was entirely mine. "I'm continuing my testimony," I said, feeling something that had been broken for decades finally begin to mend. "And when I'm done, I want every word I've said to get to my children." "Are you sure?" Gabriel asked. I looked into the camera that was broadcasting live, knowing that somewhere in New York, in a hospital where my granddaughter was fighting for her life, my daughter was hearing for the first time the truth about who her mother had been all these years. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. As I testified in The Hague, 5,000 miles away in the waiting room of Mount Sinai Hospital, Jessica stood in front of the television that usually showed daytime talk shows and cooking programs to distract worried families. But that morning, the screen was showing something completely different. Live from the International Criminal Court in The Hague, where testimony continues from U.S. Federal Agent Laura Morgan in the case that has stunned 2 continents, Jessica froze. My face filled the screen as the reporter explained that I was one of the most important undercover agents in the fight against international organized crime. "Isn't that your mom?" asked a nurse who had been on Natalie's case for the past few days. Mark, who had been checking emails, looked up and his jaw dropped, seeing me on national television, wearing a navy pantsuit he'd never seen, sitting on a judicial stand with an authority she had never once displayed at family gatherings. Agent Morgan has spent 2 decades infiltrating the world's most dangerous human trafficking networks, sacrificing her personal life to protect hundreds of innocent victims. On the screen, my voice resonated with a clarity and firmness Jessica had never heard. I let my children believe I abandoned them because it was the only way to keep them alive. The organization, the Veritas Syndicate, had my husband murdered for obtaining evidence of their operations. They told me if I didn't cooperate, my children would be found in pieces on the outskirts of the city. Jessica sank into one of the plastic waiting room chairs, the color draining from her face as she processed every word coming from my mouth on the live broadcast. Edward Morgan, my husband. I continued on the screen, my voice cracking slightly as I said her father's name, was an accountant for the Veritas Syndicate. He was murdered when he tried to deliver evidence of money laundering to federal authorities. His death was disguised as a car accident. Dad, Jessica whispered, her eyes filling with tears as she understood that everything she'd believed about her father's death was a lie designed to protect her. Mark moved slowly toward the television, mesmerized by the images showing documents, photos, and recordings I had obtained by risking my life for years. On October 23, 1998, my voice continued from the screen, I staged a terrible fight with my children. I screamed that I was tired of being a mother. I made them believe I wanted to abandon them to live my own life. Every word was like swallowing broken glass, but it was necessary to sell the story that I was leaving of my own free will. In the waiting room, other families had begun to gather around the TV, whispering in awe as my story unfolded before the entire country. "My God," murmured an elderly woman who had been waiting for news about her husband's surgery. "Can you imagine the pain of that woman? Leaving your children just to protect them?" Jessica covered her face with her hands, sobbing with an intensity she hadn't shown since she was a child. All the rage, all the resentment she had accumulated for 20 years was transforming into something more complex and devastating, the understanding that she had hated her mother for sacrifices she could never have imagined. On the screen, Gabriel Stone presented more evidence. Agent Morgan has operated under 12 different identities in 6 countries. She has documented crimes that have resulted in the capture of 87 high-level criminals. Her work has directly saved the lives of more than 500 minors who were abducted for sexual exploitation. The images changed, showing rescue operations where I appeared, in different wigs, makeup that made me unrecognizable, leading terrified children toward ambulances and social workers who would take them away from the hell where they'd been sold. "Mommy," Natalie had woken up again and was calling weakly from her hospital bed. Jessica rushed to the ICU, wiping away her tears as the nurses let her in for a few minutes. "Where's Grandma Laura?" Natalie asked, her voice hoarse from the tubes that had been in her throat. "Why did she leave? Did I do something wrong?" "No, my love." Jessica broke down completely, hugging her daughter with a desperation that held years of misunderstanding and accumulated pain. "You didn't do anything wrong. Grandma had to go, to help other little girls just like you. Is she coming back?" Jessica looked toward the television where my testimony continued, where every word I spoke was like a stone being removed from the wall of resentment she had built between us. "I don't know, sweetheart. I don't know." While this was happening in New York, I was finishing my statement in The Hague with a confession I had never made in any court. "Your Honor, I have spent 20 years living a lie to protect a truth. I have pretended not to love my children so that I could save the children of other mothers. I have sacrificed my right to be a grandmother so that other grandmothers would not have to mourn granddaughters sold like merchandise." I paused, looking directly at the camera I knew was broadcasting live. "Jessica, Rob, if you're watching this, I never stopped loving you. Every day away from you was a small death. Every missed birthday, every graduation I wasn't at, every moment I couldn't be there was the price I paid to keep you safe." My voice finally broke. "And now, when my granddaughter needs me, when I could finally be the grandmother I always wanted to be, I have to choose between holding her and protecting her from men who would kill her just to get revenge on me." Judge Vandermeer leaned forward. "Mrs. Morgan, what is your decision?" I closed my eyes and saw Natalie's face smiling at me in the only photograph I had of her, taken in secret during her last birthday party when I managed to sneak into the backyard of Jessica's house, pretending to be a lost neighbor. "My decision is that these men will pay for every child they sold, for every family they destroyed, for every mother who had to cry for a daughter who never came home." I opened my eyes and looked directly at Santoro, who had been escorted back into the courtroom. "And my decision is that my family will finally know who I really am." Gabriel played one last recording. It was my voice, but from 20 years ago, the day I accepted the mission. "I'll do it. I'll leave my children. I'll pretend not to love them. I will become whoever you need me to be. But you have to swear to me that you'll protect them. Swear that if something happens to me, someone will tell them the truth." The recording continued with the voice of the late Director Reynolds. "Laura, this is going to cost you everything. Your identity, your family, your normal life. Are you sure?" "I'm sure. But when this is all over, when these bastards are in prison, I want to come home. I want my children to know I never really abandoned them." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. In New York, Jessica was crying, holding her daughter, as federal protection units surrounded the hospital. And I, for the first time in 20 years, felt completely free to tell the truth. "Your Honor," I said to the judge, "I have finished my testimony. Now I want to go home to my family." But before the judge could respond, my phone rang one more time. It was Jessica. And for the first time in 2 decades, I answered a call from my daughter without having to pretend to be someone else. "Mom!" Her voice was broken with tears. "Mom, is that really you?" "Yes, my love," I replied, feeling the tears I had held back for years finally begin to flow. "It's me. It was always me. Mom, is that really you?" Jessica's question traveled 5,000 miles across undersea cables and satellites to land in my heart like a caress after years of slaps. "Yes, my love," I repeated, savoring every syllable of a conversation I had dreamed of for 2 decades. It was always me. On the other end of the line, I heard sobs I recognized from when Jessica was little and would hurt herself playing in the backyard of our Park Slope brownstone. The same inconsolable crying that broke my heart when she was 5 and fell off her bike, when she was 8 and the girls at school made fun of her glasses, when she was 12 and her first crush rejected her at the school dance. I can't process this," she mumbled through her tears. "For 20 years, I hated you. I cursed you every Mother's Day. Every Christmas we spent alone. Every time Rob asked why his mom didn't love him." Her words were daggers, but daggers that lanced infected wounds, a necessary pain to allow for healing. "I know, sweetheart. You needed to hate me. If you had known the truth, if you had tried to contact me, they would have realized I was faking it, and they would have used you to control me." In the courtroom, Gabriel gestured for me to end the call. The judges were waiting. The reporters were documenting every second, and the judicial process couldn't stop for a family reconciliation that was 20 years in the making. "Jessica, I have to go, but I need you to know something before this is over." "Tell me." "Every dollar I earned on these missions, every cent I didn't spend on myself, is in a trust fund in your and Rob's names. It's clean money, earned with clean blood, sweat, and tears. There's enough there so you'll never have to worry about Natalie's future again." The silence on the other end made me fear the connection had dropped. "How much?" Jessica finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. $2,800,000, plus 20 years of interest. I heard her breath catch. "Every year I couldn't buy you a birthday present. Every Christmas I couldn't be there. Every dollar I couldn't spend on you went into that account. Because even though I couldn't be present, I never stopped being your mother." I hung up before she could reply, because I knew if I heard her cry for one more second, I wouldn't have the strength to finish what I had come to do. Judge Vandermeer watched me with a patience developed over decades of hearing confessions that revealed the moral complexities of a world where doing the right thing often required methods that seemed wrong. "Are you ready to continue, Mrs. Morgan?" "Yes, Your Honor." Gabriel approached the stand with a metal case I recognized immediately. It was my personal file. The complete record of every operation, every identity, every moment of the 20 years I had lived as a ghost. "Mrs. Morgan, do you recognize this container?" "Yes. It contains my complete operational file, documentation of 137 missions in 18 countries, photographic evidence of crimes committed by 215 individuals, audio recordings implicating 62 high-level public officials in corruption and human trafficking." One by one, Gabriel presented documents that told the story of a woman who had lived dozens of lives to destroy a criminal network from within. Each paper was a scar, each photograph a wound, each recording a piece of my soul I had sacrificed to gain the trust of monsters who sold children like cattle. "This is Mary Ruiz." Gabriel said, showing a photograph where I appeared with bleached blonde hair, heavy makeup that made me look 10 years younger, and provocative clothing I had to wear to infiltrate circles where criminals expected women to be decorative rather than intelligent. Identity used to infiltrate Michael Torres's operation in Marbella during 2015. In the picture, I was at a high-stakes poker game, surrounded by men betting fortunes while casually discussing how to transport abducted girls from Latin America to European brothels. I had to laugh at their misogynistic jokes, feign admiration for their power, and act like the kind of woman impressed by blood money. And this is Carol Vance. Gabriel showed another photo. Here I had black hair, intellectual glasses, and was dressed as the freelance journalist I'd pretended to be for 3 years to gain access to Santoro and his circle of corrupt politicians. In that image, I was having dinner at Per Se with Santoro, smiling as he proudly explained how he had turned American ports into distribution hubs for human trafficking. I had to pretend to take notes for a flattering article while actually documenting every detail of his unwitting confessions. For these 20 years, I declared, looking directly at the defendants, I have had to become everything I despise. I've had to smile at men who sold children. I've had to feign admiration for politicians who betrayed their own country. I've had to act like the kind of woman who is impressed by dirty money and corrupt power. My voice grew stronger, but every night, when I was done pretending to be someone else, I would lie awake thinking about my children, wondering if Jessica had gotten a job after college, if Rob had found love, if I would ever have grandchildren I would never meet. In New York, Jessica had stopped crying and was now watching the screen with an intensity that suggested she was memorizing every word, every gesture, every expression that had been absent from her life for 2 decades. Mark sat beside her, also silent, his phone forgotten in his lap as he processed the fact that the woman he had treated with casual disdain was a national hero whose work had saved more lives than he could count. So what now? Mark asked, his voice devoid of the arrogance that had characterized him. What happens when the trial is over? Jessica looked at him with eyes that had aged years in a matter of hours. Now I understand why Natalie always asks for her. Kids feel things that we adults can't see. On the screen, Gabriel was presenting the final piece of evidence, recordings of the defendant's last conversations after Carlos Ramirez's arrest. We have to eliminate the journalist. Torres's voice could be heard. If she talks, we all go down. I've already taken care of it, Reed's voice replied. My contacts in the States will find her, and when they do, they'll make her wish she was never born. And her family? Especially her family. We have to send a clear message. Jessica stood up abruptly as she heard the threats against her own life, against Natalie's life. Does that mean... She began, but her voice trailed off as she understood the full implications. It means your mother has been protecting our lives for 20 years, Mark said, his tone completely transformed. And she'll probably keep doing it even though we treated her like dirt. At that moment, as if the universe had been waiting for that acknowledgement, 3 men in plain clothes entered the hospital and identified themselves as federal agents. Mrs. Gutierrez, the leader, a tall man with a scar on his cheek that suggested field experience, addressed Jessica with professional respect. We're the protection detail assigned by order of the prosecutor's office. We've identified direct threats against your family. We need to relocate you immediately. Relocate? Jessica looked around the hospital where she had spent the last 4 days, where Natalie was hooked up to machines that couldn't be easily moved. Medical transfer to a private hospital with enhanced security, the agent explained. Your daughter can receive the same level of care under full federal protection. And for how long? Mark asked, for the first time showing genuine concern that wasn't about personal inconvenience. Until the court in The Hague passes sentence. And until we can guarantee that all of the Veritas Syndicate's associates have been neutralized. Jessica glanced at the screen, where my image was still visible as reporters analyzed the case. Can I talk to my mother? The agent nodded and handed her a satellite phone. Direct line to The Hague. Completely secure. Jessica took the device with trembling hands and dialed the number the agent gave her. In The Hague, my phone rang just as the judge was about to call a recess. Jessica? Mom? Her voice was filled with an emotion I hadn't heard directed at me since she was a teenager. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me for everything I said. There's nothing to forgive, my love. I left you. It doesn't matter why. I left you when you needed me most. No, Jessica spoke with a new firmness, as if she had made a fundamental decision. You saved us. For 20 years you saved us, and we never even knew. I could hear voices in the background. Doctors preparing Natalie's transfer. Federal agents organizing the security detail. Mark asking questions about safety protocols. Natalie asks for you constantly, Jessica told me. She says she wants to show you a drawing she made. She says you're the bravest grandma in the world. My tears finally fell, after years of keeping them in check to function as a spy. I'm coming home, I promised her. As soon as this is over, I'm coming home. We'll be waiting, Mom. We'll be waiting. 6 months after that day that changed everything, I'm sitting in the garden of the new house we share in a quiet suburb, watching Natalie run through the rose bushes we planted together last week. Her laughter fills the afternoon air like music I had forgotten existed, the sound of a child who is no longer afraid, who no longer asks why adults speak in whispers, or why strange men watch the house from cars with tinted windows. The pavilion, the private hospital where she finished her recovery under federal protection, had become our second home for 3 months. I arrived every morning with storybooks and drawing pads, making up for lost time, one story, one drawing, one conversation at a time. Natalie taught me how to make beaded bracelets while I told her child-friendly versions of some of the countries I had visited on my missions. Grandma, is it true you've been to Paris? She had asked one afternoon, her eyes shining with 9-year-old curiosity. Yes, sweetie. But I never saw it as a tourist. I never got to go up the Eiffel Tower or walk along the Champs-Élysées like a normal grandma. Why not? Because I was working to protect little girls just like you. Natalie had pondered this with the seriousness only a child can apply to concepts adults deem too complex. So you couldn't have fun in those pretty places because you were saving girls? That's right. That makes you way cooler than a normal grandma. And in that moment, hugging her, smelling her chamomile shampoo and feeling her heart beat against my chest, I knew the 20 years of sacrifice had been worth every second of pain. The trial in The Hague ended with sentences that would ensure no one from the Veritas Syndicate would ever see freedom again. Santoro received a life sentence on 53 counts of human trafficking. Torres, 40 years for money laundering and racketeering. Reed, 35 years for judicial corruption and obstruction of justice. The others received sentences guaranteeing they would spend the rest of their lives paying for the suffering they had caused. But the real victory wasn't legal. It was personal. It took Jessica weeks to find the courage to apologize completely. Not for the cruel words in the hospital. Those I understood and had forgiven before she'd even said them. She apologized for something deeper, for choosing to hate me without seeking the truth, for building her adult identity on resentment for a mother who had never stopped loving her. I should have known, she told me one afternoon over coffee on the new patio. I should have felt that something wasn't right. That you weren't the kind of woman who just abandons her kids. You had no way of knowing, honey. That was the whole point. But Rob knew. That confession surprised me. Rob, my younger son, who hadn't answered my calls in 5 years, who had gotten married without inviting me. What do you mean? He called me yesterday from Denver. He said he always knew something was wrong about you leaving. That mothers like you don't just walk out for no reason. He said he'd been waiting 20 years for you to come back so he could ask what really happened. Jessica paused, stirring her coffee with nervous movements I recognized from her teenage years. He wants to come visit, with his wife Elena, and the kids. He wants you to meet your other grandchildren. The prospect of meeting Rob's children, of getting back not only the son I had lost, but the grandchildren I'd never held, seemed too good to be true. Is he sure? He said he kept all the letters you sent him, in a box under his bed all these years. He said he knew one day he'd need them to remember his mom's handwriting when she could finally explain. Those letters. I had sent them in secret, using fake return addresses, writing as a distant aunt who cared for him but couldn't reveal her identity. Small lies wrapped in enormous truths. Rob arrived last week with Elena, a sweet elementary school teacher, and their 2 children, Leo, 7, and Sophie, 5. It was strange meeting my daughter-in-law for the first time at 63. But Elena hugged me as if she'd been waiting her whole life. "Rob told me so much about you," she said. "He always said his mom would come back when it was safe." Leo looks just like Rob at that age. Big eyes, endless curiosity. Sophie is shy but has Jessica's smile. "Are you the secret grandma?" Leo had asked me with the bluntness of a 7-year-old. "Yes, honey. I had to be a secret to keep you all safe." "Like a superhero?" "Something like that." "That's so cool. My grandma is a superhero." And in that innocent declaration, I finally found peace. This morning, Natalie finished a drawing she's been working on for weeks. It's a portrait of our whole family in the garden. Her, Jessica, Mark, Rob, Elena, Leo, Sophie, and me. Everyone is smiling under a big yellow sun. In the drawing, I'm wearing a red cape that's blowing in the wind. "It's your superhero cape, Grandma," she explained. "Because you saved girls like me." "And why is it blowing in the wind?" "Because you don't have to hide anymore. Now you can fly." As I write this, the sun is setting behind the bougainvillea, painting the sky the same pink and gold I saw from the plane when I returned from The Hague 6 months ago. But now I see it without fear, without constantly looking over my shoulder. Jessica is in the kitchen making dinner, my mother's recipe for beef bourguignon, which I finally got to teach her. Rob and his family will be here in an hour for our weekly dinner, a new tradition. Mark has turned out to be a much better son-in-law than I thought. Once he understood, he started treating me with a respect I'd never seen. More importantly, he started valuing Jessica differently. The bank account was real, of course. The $2,800,000 had grown to nearly $4 million. Money earned with blood, sweat, and tears, but clean money to build the future my children deserved. Jessica cried for hours when she saw the statements, when she understood that every cheap meal I ate, every second-hand dress I bought, had been to ensure their security. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" she'd asked through her sobs. "Because if you knew I had money, you would have asked questions, and questions would have led to answers that would have put you in danger." Tonight, after everyone goes home, after Natalie is asleep in her new room decorated with drawings of princesses who are also secret spies, I will sit in my new study, the first space that has been just mine in over 20 years, and write in my journal. I will write about the necessary pain, the worthwhile sacrifices, and the love that survived 2 decades of forced denial. I'll write about what it feels like to wake up each morning without having to pretend to be someone else. I'll write about what it feels like to finally be free. Because freedom isn't the absence of responsibility. Freedom is being who you really are without endangering the people you love. And after 63 years, I am finally free. Have you ever had to pretend not to love someone to protect them? If you know someone who sacrificed everything for their family without recognition, tell me their story in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, please leave a like and subscribe, so this message can reach someone who needs to hear it.